Joseph Murphy, who is Associate Dean and Professor at Vanderbilt University. He has served in virtually every leadership position in public schools and is a past Vice President and Fellow of the AERA, the American Education Research Association. He's edited many books, over 30, I think. Joe, you can correct me if I'm wrong, including, very importantly, the 2012 comprehensive literature review titled Homeschooling in America, Capturing and Assessing the Movement. Joe, please share with us. You're unmuted now, Joe. Go right ahead. Yes, I can hear you fine.
Thank you. All right. Thank you for being here. I want to start with one comment. We need to think long-term about what homeschooling would mean for your country or your state, because we could do something and in 15 years look back and say we've created another crisis. So think forward as well as just solving the problem. We don't want to create another problem, we solve this problem. I agree with Michael. I started in on this very simple reason. People were telling me that parents shouldn't homeschool their kids and that kids were not doing well. And I said, this doesn't sound right. So I spent 2 or 3 years looking into it, and those claims are inadequate at best, okay? So I want to talk about 4 things very quickly in my overview. Why are we here in this state we're in now? The numbers and growth, as Michael introduction, and then the impact of the movement, okay? So that's where we're headed. The reason we're here really doesn't have a lot to do with the virus, or right now this has a lot to do with the virus, but you need to understand it's a bigger movement than that. What we're finding is that we are in the era of a major world change in the economy, in politics, and in society. And it's those forces that have pushed homeschooling onto center stage, and they're not going anywhere. They're beginning to increase. So when I say that, I mean from 1920 through about 2020, the industrial era, schools were pretty much run by professional people and by government. And people began to say, you know, that's too limited. We need a bigger say. And you've got the introduction of parents directly, and you have the introduction with markets. And those 2 forces, along with the other 2 forces, are really reconceptualizing education so it may look quite different in the next century than what we've had in the past. And I think that's a really important reason. We have parents who are much more interested based on religion. That's how it got started in this country. The people began to homeschool because society pushed religion out of public schooling, and parents weren't happy. Some parents weren't happy about that. There was also a belief that kids were getting less than safe care at many schools. They were bullied and other things. And then there was also a really growing movement that parents and children needed to be together, not separated for 3/4 of the day. And that the goal of parents was to keep the family together. So you begin to get these big changes that began to push homeschooling as a very legitimate alternative. Because in 1979, if you homeschooled your kid here, police would have been at your door and you would have been arrested, you would have been taken to jail. That's how far we've come, okay? So big shift. Michael talked about it. There's just more people than we know what to do with their homeschooling, and we're struggling with how to deal with that. As I said earlier, the homeschooling movement in this country started with the church, and people began to look to churches to help them figure out what to do, and they did. And what they found is churches would set up activities, do all sorts of things, take kids on field trips, set up algebra class on Thursday night in somebody's home, and physics class at somebody's home in the afternoon, on another afternoon. So you had this large movement begin, and it moved away from just relying on the church to relying on the whole society to provide the education. And what that means is many, many mothers did not have to stay home and be with their child every day, all day long. So you began to set up a pattern where the kids were homeschooled, but they were homeschooled in a variety of places in addition to the home, which meant that parents could both be employed. So that was a huge shift that's just happened. And you also see here now, at least, and it is the mixture of public and homeschooling. So when it started, homeschooling people hated the public school people, and the public school people hated the homeschool people, right? And they didn't even look at each other. That went on for a short amount of time, and then they realized they're both in the same game. We should play together. And you see, in this country, you see a fair number of homeschooling kids that go back to public schools for a specific subject area, right? Algebra in the 9th grade or whatever. And they now are on the sports teams and other co-curricular activities if they want to be. So the breakdown between the home and the school has taken place, and you see a variety of places where students are schooled when they're homeschooled, not just in their own home. That's been a very significant shift. So then that takes me to the end, which is the impacts. As I said earlier, when homeschool, anything starts, everybody here assumes it's the devil appearing or the Lord appearing, right? And they act accordingly. Well, when homeschooling arrived, it was the devil. And the assumptions were it would work, it was bad, kids would be harmed, society would be destroyed, there would be no social relationships. Everything that could go wrong was brought up. And what we found since then is that if you just look at academic growth, we don't see any evidence that these students are damaged academically at all. They do as well or better. I don't want to overstate this case, but they're not harmed. That was the big issue. And it looks like they may be even doing better than some of their peers in regular schools. And that was a pretty big finding. Social development was a second major concern, that these kids would become social isolates. They wouldn't have friends. They would stay in their home until they died, and the world would be troubled. That is not true. These kids, through the places that they get their schooling, churches, civil associations, and other places, have more contact with adults and related people to grow. And what social development actually means, they get it firsthand. They're not reading it. And that's been a really important finding, a really important outcome, I think. And then self-concept, there was a concern, of course, that the students would develop dysfunctional self-concept and lack of efficacy. And that's just not been true at all. Again, they do at least as well and oftentimes better. So the future, we need people in government roles particularly, and in professional roles, and in market roles. Market has a lot to do with homeschooling in this country. To understand what is going on, why it is going on, what's actually happening to children, and what they can do to be part of that movement to help children grow, to help society develop, and help the world be a better place. And I think we can do that. I think that's your job. You have, of course, the really tough part of that. You're actually in a crisis, and that makes it palpable for everybody. But remember, the crisis did not start this, and it's not going to end if the crisis went away tomorrow. It's an international movement of great significance that we need to keep on the table. Thank you.
Thank you very